Before we start, on behalf of all the operators, my commiserations in the previous session. I could see some heads hanging out there. We've all been through that. But the reality is the last point Mr. Talwar made, which is that over all these years, the operators have always delivered for the owners, which is why you've never really seen litigation. But we've got more interesting things to talk about. So no introductions required for Rajesh. I've always thought of him as almost like the oracle for our industry. Somebody who at any point in time can give you, an insight into what the future holds. So that's what we're going to get into over this brief time which we have here. So 2025 and beyond that, I think what would be of most interest for the ownership community here is that they're going to be making investments in building more hotels. The market seems to be buoyant for growth of our industry. We saw some great hot stats, which looked really good. We saw some real trends of consumers, which looked really good. So please reiterate that to our audience here and tell us what 2025 and perhaps a year or two beyond that holds for our industry.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Dilip. You were very kind with the introduction, first of all. I'm glad to be here. I think I'm speaking to this audience, at least 50% of this audience for the first time, so it's a privilege. I'm saying the owner side of it, operators we work very closely with in any case. So let's talk about, like Dilip pointed out, more the positive things and the good things that are definitely going to come while we keep negotiating the contracts. I haven't seen the hot stats. I wasn't there for that session, but I'm pretty sure there was very, very positive future outlook that was portrayed. But let me just try to give, some of our perspective as we see, looking at various sort of data points, but more the underneath drivers, really, rather than just looking at the, like a 30,000 feet level output metric, if you will. Which is the GDP growth. Everyone knows that the GDP growth is robust in India. If you compare it with the rest of the world, we are by far leading on that front, and likely to continue to keep leading. Now that is the output metric, the way we see it. But I think it's important to also understand why is that the GDP growth is going to happen, right? Some of the underneath real drivers, because those are the ones that will give you more confidence, and conviction in terms of just accepting the future positive outlook, if you will. And the first one, I don't know whether it gets the due attention or not. It's actually the demographic dividend in the country, which is phenomenally better than the rest of the world. In fact, if you really go deeper, you would realize that the Western world, this dividend has become liability, actually. And only the Asian subcontinent where it remains dividend. And within that, India is leading by far. So much so that the median age of the country today is about 28 years. Which effectively means that the working population, which is effectively the data that you should look at from a demographic dividend standpoint, is going to peak at 2047, right? So we have so many years of, just getting to that peak of working population, which means the size of working population is already very huge. It's only going to keep growing till we get to the peak in 2047. Just as a comparison, I'll tell you about China is the only country, in this part of the world where they still have few more years. They are now actually going closer to the liability side, but they still have few more years for their demographic dividend to still stay there. And then there are countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and stuff like that. Much smaller in size, but definitely the working age population has not really become liability because it's not an aging population there. I think that drives two things. One, it drives, of course, there is going to be a lot more people available, a lot more talent available, and therefore, if there is more investment happening in the country, there is going to be labor that is going to be available, the skilled labor, the unskilled labor, the semi-skilled labor that's going to be available. because otherwise that becomes a major constraint. And then the most important thing from a demand standpoint is that it's going to drive the consumption, right? Because just the sheer size, it's going to drive the consumption. Now, if that is one big thing that we should keep in mind, if that continues to be positive, and it is well understood, then you would realize that there is, why do we think that the GDP growth or the next 20 years is going to be, like India's, sort of decade or 2 decades from just the overall growth standpoint and the outlook standpoint. Now come to the second one, which is, let's say if this is true, which is factually true, then you have to obviously harness it. You obviously have to execute on your strategy. And for executing your strategies, you need money, you need investment. And let me give you very sort of hard-hitting facts, if you will, on the liquidity position in India. The liquidity position in India, both from foreign capital standpoint and in Indian capital standpoint. For the longest time, by the way, we used to be dependent on all foreign capital. For the last 2 decades, we've got about $1 trillion of foreign direct investment. Just in the last year, by the way, it was about 42 billion foreign direct investment. And all of that is happening because India is becoming like a very interesting country from investment standpoint across the board, across the sectors. And therefore, more and more foreign capital is coming. That is one reason. The second big reason is the rest of the world is not happening. China went through a slowdown, so because of China, we got the benefit. Europe has been going through their own constraints. And the only country that is doing well from an economy standpoint is actually US. And that becomes a bit of a, sort of threat in terms of if India is not doing well, India is not executing well, then the money goes back to America, right? That is the only thing that we should watch out for. But otherwise, against the rest of the world, we are very well poised. And we're already getting money, and we will continue to keep getting money. Don't worry too much about when you see headlines for the last, let's say, few weeks, where there's a lot of sellout happening from FDI, from stock market. Completely different reason, by the way. It is a very short-term tactical reason because of the valuations being very, very high. That has nothing to do with the long-term commitment to the country by these institutions. That's one. The second is that over the last 20 years, our domestic financial institutions have become very, very powerful, very, very liquid. More importantly, flexible in terms of investing money in different sectors. They never used to have norms where they would end up investing money into the equity market, for example. Our IPO market is nothing but the pool of capital that is available for the companies who are going public, right? And a lot of the money is actually coming from domestic institutional investors. They are leading the pack. They never used to be the case for 2 reasons. One, they were conservative in their investment approach. They'll go very, very safe debt products versus equity products. And 2, the size of that pool was not that attractive, right? Both things have changed. So the liquidity is getting solved. And then the third, which is the linked point. When you have money, you have the liquidity available, you have to deploy it. And I think government is doing a phenomenal job in terms of just allocating continuously the amount of money that they want to put behind the infrastructure investment. About $1.4 trillion to be precise by 2027 is going to get deployed on infrastructure investment. And within that, about 20% is just the road infrastructure, which is about $266 billion, right? Now, obviously, the first step is allocation, and then you have to execute it. And when you look at the execution, even in the last budget, it was about 90% that got deployed, right? And you can see it's visible. When you look at the expressways and the highways, it's visible. When you see the number of airports that are going to come up, by the way, about 200 airports by 27, 28 is what they're talking about it. Maybe it'll spill over by a year or 2, but that's what is happening on the infrastructure. Then the fourth one is the digital economy. The digital world, the digital economy in India, again, driven by government in many, many ways, actually with path-breaking investments in the solutions, the likes of UPI, which is the world first, right? We had not necessarily had ever, at least in the history of technology, had come up with the world first platform which we did in the last 10 years. I actually can't go back. If you go back in history and technology, you would see all the innovations happening by the way Western world or China, right? AI is the recent good example, and we can talk about that as we go down that path. But the world, the digital economy is very, very strong in India, driving it. It is going to open up horizons for everyone. And the next phase, which is an opportunity and a missed opportunity if we don't really sort of embrace that, is going to be AI, right? Because that is going to, next 20 years, transform the technology space. Like literally transform the technology space. I was just very recently in Gurgaon, very AI-focused, high-quality conference called Synapse. 2 days, it was mind-blowing in terms of the application of this AI, especially Gen AI, in different fields and sectors that was demonstrated literally. Not talked about as concept, it was demonstrated.
So that really leads in well with the next question. I mean, our industry, and I think we can all acknowledge that, we've been pretty much lagging in adapting technology historically. Even in terms of, you look at how loyalty started. It started with airlines, we followed. You look at how our growth, where airlines flew, we followed there. So even with technology, we've always been laggards in terms of adaptation. Now you're bringing about AI because it is new and clearly not going anywhere. What can our audience understand that if we want to proactively adapt technology to run our businesses better, what can we do to adapt to AI better?
No, I think it's a great question. Because, like I mentioned, it's going to be, I mean, the tech revolution has been happening for some time in India. But I think the key important point to focus on here is that India has largely been the consumer of technology, not necessarily. So when you read about this technology and you read about all the headlines where all the big players, whether it is Meta or Alphabet or Elon Musk or DeepSeek in China, that they're going to do the research model. They are doing some foundational stuff on developing AI models. They started 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So we've missed that bus, by the way. I don't think India is going to get into developing their own foundational models because that ship has sailed. What we can do, however, and I think and time will only tell, but India might end up being the largest country who would consume this technology if they get their act together. Because it's available, it's cheaper, it's becoming cheaper. It's not cheap right now, but it'll become cheaper because a lot of open source that is coming in. So what do we need to really do to sort of adapt it? I think the first step is going to be, as I guess you alluded to, if we are laggard, then we will have to accept and then act very fast on it, right? And then there are many, many applications. I'll give you some areas where it is already, there's no proof of concept required, it's actually applied already. Like for example, customer services as one area where there's tremendous amount of automation, especially in a country like us, which is multilingual, because all the local languages play a very big role, as we know. The country is large. And this technology gives you the power to be able to place an agent, via the agentic GI technology, as they call it, equal or at par with the human agent in terms of conversation, right, in the user interface. You give the user interface whatever question that you want to ask in whatever language that you want to ask, or a hybrid way that you want to ask.
So you're talking about natural language?
I'm talking about natural languages.
Okay.
And you will get the responses in that language. The intelligence will be there for that agent to understand it, artificial agent, to understand it very intelligently and respond very intelligently, right? Which was not the case earlier. The language models did not exist, and the intelligence did not exist as much as it is available today. For you to be able to just consume it, comprehend it, and throw it back the relevant response. Otherwise you will hit a roadblock, right? All of that is possible and is being used, being consumed already. And none other than, many ITES companies would have already used it. There are already many service providers who are offering this solution. We at MakeMyTrip have also sort of, already deployed that. That is one area, big area. The other area is on the customer experience side on the front end, right? Which is again, when you're, let's say you have your direct channel, you're working with a partner like ours, etc. A lot of the data being consumed and the personalized experience or personalized, sort of results being given to the consumer when you're looking for, like let's say start your customer journey from search, booking, and, sort of post-sales perspective, if you will. And the third area is in your own hotel. You have the PMS, for example, right? Now, PMS, there's a lot of legacy in that system, if you will. I don't think, we think that we need to open it up for, sort of better technology to come in and leverage that, right? I think there are a ton of opportunities. Like I give you one example, and my favorite example that I give in every hotel conference. Airlines have been able to do a Digi Yatra moment for them. We haven't really been able to do anything, right? So why can't we just also do the smooth check-in? Like, you don't have to stand in the queue and we will just have everything collected up front.
Just your face. Just show your face.
Just show your face. Do your biometric and get in, right? So stuff like that. So there are many, many areas, but what we need to do is obviously invest behind it, except first, and you may not have the capability, but then there are many, many experts who are available, which you can just...
So I guess the learning here, or the idea here for ownership groups is that when you negotiate with operators, there's a pretty sizable technology fee for all kinds of IT and tech stuff, which they promise you. Perhaps the conversations should move towards saying, where's the AI in what you're providing me, and what is it doing for me, my business, my profits? Because clearly it's not going anywhere. We have to understand how to use it. It's really the brands and the operators who directly interact with consumers, and I'm sure they're doing a lot of work, but adapting AI into our front-end consumer-facing processes is something which will almost become mandatory going forward in hotels. So Rajesh, moving on, you spoke a bit about infrastructure. The alternate accommodation segment, my own sense is that, or let me just ask you a series of questions around it. So is it good for the consumer? Is it a threat to the traditional hospitality businesses? Is it a bubble? Does it need to be regulated? And what can hoteliers do, if not to counter this, at least to understand that, here is a completely different segment of the market for accommodation, which has suddenly become available. My own sense is most of us as hoteliers, we've played down its impact and in the last 2-3 years. And is it something which we need to be more concerned about? How is it going to evolve? Would you share that?
Yeah, no, happy to. And it's clearly a new emerging trend, and it's been actually a while now. I remember one conference like this, again, pre-COVID days. This was a very curious question from the audience. I remember in Gurgaon, Leela, at Ambience. And even at that point in time, when it was a curious question was posed to me, and I had said, you should watch this space for sure, because this is definitely coming. And I continue to believe that, and now more so, because there's a lot of data to now support it also. It's not a hypothesis anymore, right? So first, to answer your first question, is it good for the consumer? Most definitely, right? Is it a threat for the traditional hotels? I actually don't look this or any sort of development in the
You're trying to be nice to them, you don't need to.
No, I'm not being nice to them. I really mean it, because it is a function of how you see it. I always see it more as an opportunity because you can do something about it, right? Because, let's take a step back. What is the alternative accommodation and where was it coming from? It was actually fundamentally coming from the need of the consumer, right? Which the consumer here in India has been evolving, by the way, and you would have seen, I'm pretty sure in the previous discussions, where the data was being shared, where the Gen Z was being talked about, right? So the younger population in India, everybody talks about it. Now, their need, their expectation, their consumer buying behavior, their expectation at the property, what they expect, etc., is very different, right? So fundamentally, it is coming from the consumer insights, right? So when it is coming from the consumer insights, you got to, sort of not be in denial mode, learn that from that and see what tweaking that you can do in your product or in your strategy, right? So that is where I see this as actually as an opportunity and never as a threat. And in many, at least hotel partners that we know, they've already sort of invested in and looked at this space very, very carefully as well. So I don't think it's a threat. I think it's an opportunity. People who have not been taking it seriously should take it seriously. But let me tell you the good news. The good news is, again, we've looked at the data very, very closely. There are new demand use cases have emerged because of this, which is good, which means the market is expanding. Like I'll give you a couple of examples. So the group travel, the celebrating occasions, whether it's birthday, the anniversaries, the festivals. My younger niece's birthday was yesterday, and she was in a homestay accommodation celebrating with her friends, and it wasn't a milestone birthday. It wasn't a milestone birthday. It was just because that's just changing, because nobody wants to be now the generation, and of course they have pocket money, and she's also working, and she wanted to have good time with the friends at a location which will give them flexibility and that they can enjoy, right? That's one use case, right? And then the second in the business cities, and we all know the business cities are very, very busy, right? And there's always a demand-supply sort of catch-up game that happens there. In some clusters, the apartments are doing very good business, right? Because there's an alternative form of supply that is available, and there's a new small and medium enterprise market that is booming in the country. There is demand and need for a value, sort of product. Right? So, and the hostels, and then pilgrimage, let's not forget. Now, pilgrimage has given birth to, and let's take Mahakumbh as a massive aberration. But before that, Ayodhya, right? Because even in Ayodhya, and again, this is like hard fact, that while the demand in Ayodhya was triggered by event, but it has sustained. That's a new consumer trend. Now, people are not going to pilgrimage places for only religious purpose. People are going for history and culture, right? And all kind of, by the way, consumer cohorts are visiting. So there are so many new use cases that are developing. Fundamentally, people are taking more breaks in India. Fundamentally, people are traveling more, which means there's more demand. And therefore, there is need emerging in the market for non-hotel type alternative accommodations, right? So I think that is how it needs to be seen. And I don't think it's a bubble at all. Because if it's a bubble, then, I think globally it would not survive. I mean, globally, both hotels and, sort of alternative accommodations business models have also survived.
Okay. Last question, in the interest of time, just coming back to the technology part, you're constantly talking about consumer insights. Yeah. And because of the kind of data you generate, you produce, you're able to interpret, you are able to be much more agile and pivot very quickly because this behavior is changing faster and faster. How can hoteliers adapt to that? I mean, firstly, the aversion to data. When you look at too much of data and you say, what am I going to do with this? So some very quick insights into how, by using that data more effectively, getting the right consumer insights, they could make decisions quicker, faster, in terms of how that behavior changed?
Absolutely. It's a great question. Because, the reality, by the way, for all the Gen AI and the ML or the data science that we talk about, the real hero is always data. Because if you don't have data, your application using all these fancy technologies will produce nothing, right? So you will have to take the data, whatever data that you have. In the previous session also, the data dispute was ownership of data. At some level, I don't think we should actually get lost in that discussion, to be honest, as long as we come to meeting of minds where we are ultimately going to leverage the data to deliver the business for both, right? Because if we focus on that, we will end up sort of doing a lot more together rather than just getting lost in saying who's going to own that data and all that. And I think very aptly it was put, the data actually belongs to consumer. It doesn't belong to any of the other people. It is the best part is when you have taken the permission, you have the data, how best you sort of use that. And you can use that for various sort of applications. The biggest one, for example, which is where the money is, right? We were talking about RevPAR. How do I, sort of become real time? In many ways, by the way, at MakeMyTrip, there is a dynamic pricing engine which takes the inputs real time, ingest for various inputs, whether it is market related, sort of event related, pent up demand here, seasonality, non-seasonality, business location, leisure location, pilgrimage location, et cetera, and then ends up sort of deciding whether the offer engine has to give X percentage of offer versus Y percentage of offer, which is nothing but pricing, right? So if you have to do the yield management, by the way, airlines do a good job of it. And more, and some of the hotel brands also do a good job of it, but if it should be widespread in terms of just consumption of all the data real time. The trouble that I was alluding to earlier, these systems that we have are not necessarily, they're a very closed system. They're not necessarily open to receiving inputs from various places and then be able to do the magic on the pricing, right? So unless we sort of change the mindset to say, what are we trying to focus on? And I'm not saying no one sort of needs to get concerned about protecting the protection side of it, whatever is the protection, right? But ultimately, the focus should be how best I use it with the whatever little protection that I need to ultimately sort of deliver the best outcome for the customers.
Okay, well, there were so many more questions we could have asked. We've run out of time. Thank you very much,
No problem.
Rajesh.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.